Hello, hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session on the Industrial Emissions Directive, perhaps not very attractively named, but a very important piece of EU policy legislation for those of you who don't know it. The Industrial Emissions Directive, or the IED, as we will probably start calling it shortly, is the main EU instrument regulating pollutant emissions from industrial installations. In practice, that's more than 50,000 installations. It's a directive that was agreed more than 10 years ago now. It's been in force since 2013, and it's up for review at the moment with a proposal for a revision to it due by the end of the year. And all of that, of course, in the context of the European Green Deal and the ambitions for climate neutrality and zero pollution by 2050. So who am I? My name is Sonja van Rensen. I'm the moderator, your moderator for the next hour. I will try and get us through the program, make sure that all of our speakers get across the points they're here to make, and of course, make sure that you too get your questions in. It's intended to be a panel discussion amongst us. We're with a group of experts, but it's also intended to be a place where you can put your ideas, thoughts, and questions to our experts. So I'm just very briefly, I'm the managing editor of a new website called Energy Monitor, which is devoted to the energy transition. On the panel today, I'll introduce them in a tiny bit more detail as we get to them, but we have Aneta Willems here from the European Commission. We have Nicolas Humez here from Hazardous Waste Europe. We have Marcin Wisniewski here from the Climate and Environment Ministry in Poland. And finally, we have Aliki, Kriekouki here from the EEB, the European Environmental Bureau, a network of environmental organizations in Europe. So maybe a housekeeping point first. I said we are interested in your questions. The question then is, how do you get those to us? We're using Slido for that. So if you don't already have it open, please open Slido in your browser. And you'll need to enter a code probably, that is EU GreenWeek 2021. And then you'll need to select your room, which is the Building Cleaner, More Circular Industrial Plants, or Room 1. And there you'll see you have a place to ask questions. We'll see those, so we'll try and integrate them into our discussion throughout. And in addition to a Q&A tab, you'll also see a polls tab. And what we're going to do is kick off with a poll, which is a question to you to give us some input into your thinking. So let's have the first polling question to kick off the session this afternoon. And that question, if we can trigger it, should be, in your opinion, what are the major drivers in making the transition to a circular economy happen? And I think you can take, well, you should take a maximum of 2 of these, which I appreciate is tricky, even as such, but let's see how far we get. I'll give you just a moment to do that. And then I would say, can we screen the results as they come in? And we'll see what you think are the major drivers. Maybe in the intervening 30 seconds or so, I can say that the goal today is, as I said, to talk about the IED, but it's to talk about one specific aspect of that, which is what it could do to further promote the circular economy agenda. So in an evaluation of the IED last autumn, the conclusion was that it's performed very well, particularly when it comes to reducing pollutant emissions to air, but that it's actually quite difficult to say what kind of impact it's had on the circular economy. And there we're thinking about things like promoting resource efficiency. Resource could be energy, it can also be water, it can be how you use materials. There are things in the IED that relate to this, but they're not as clear-cut, often not as legally binding as what it sets out on actual pollutant emissions to air. So the purpose of today's discussion is to talk a little bit about what else, now that it's under review, could it do to promote a circular economy. So can we see the results to the poll? As Are you seeing them? I'm the only one not seeing them, perhaps.
I'm not seeing them, no.
No. If not, then we'll kick off and perhaps we can see them a little later. There we go. Okay, I can't see the results because they're too small on my screen, unfortunately, but I can just about make them out. And I think most people have picked the overwhelming majority, what is it? Almost half of you are saying regulatory pressure and global agendas is the main driver in making the transition to a circular economy happen. Okay, well, regulatory pressure, that's good since we're here to talk about regulation. And what I would like to do then is hand over to Aneta Willems to kick us off. As I said, she's here from the European Commission. She's head of unit at DG Environment for the Industrial Emissions and Safety Unit. This is basically the unit in charge of the IED. She's headed it up for the last 6 years and is therefore currently also in charge of the IED's revision, an economist by training. And I suppose you're going to tell me you're in listening mode here since you're looking for ideas on how to do this revision. But the question is, what else? I mean, you must have some ideas already in mind as we enter this final phase. What else, or how could the IED be adapted to do more to benefit and promote the circular economy?
Thank you very much for this introduction, Sonia, and welcome to all participants and especially to my co-presenters. This lovely subject of this session, building cleaner and more circular industrial plants, and then challenges and opportunities from the review of the IED. This is exactly the core of the issue here. Like you said, the IED is already a directive that is a long time on the market. It covers a humongous amount of industrial emissions installations in agro-industrial sectors, and it also covers the big range of pollutants that are coming from those installations. What is very important about the Industrial Emissions Directive, in its principle, it's the integrated approach to pollution prevention and control. And in the whole subject of the European Green Deal, so Zero Pollution Action Plan and Zero Pollution Ambition, this is exactly the IED fit in like a glove, because this means integrated approach not only to emissions to air, water and soil, but also the IED deals with very important environmental aspects such as resource use, reduction of waste generation, prevention of noise or other emissions. And the integrated approach also states that the reduction of pollution into one medium, for example, to air, should not be at the expense of increasing the pollution elsewhere, for example, in increased waste. And the directive already integrates the life cycle thinking from the inception in this respect. All this is also designed to achieve the set goal of this directive, a high level of protection of the environment taken as a whole. And the ongoing review of the EU measures on industrial emissions, like you say, is a major pillar of the Commission's Zero Pollution Action Plan that was just adopted last 12th of May. And there, it's not only the revision of the measures on pollution, but also on EU energy, decarbonization, and circular economy policies, and how it links with the goals of 2030 and progressively 2050. And the IED revision that is now ongoing does not take place in the bubble. It builds on the conclusions from the evaluation published last September. And like you already stated, one of the very important aspects was that the revision should also look into contribution of the Industrial Emissions Directive into circular economy and resource efficiency aspects. And the ID evaluation showed indeed that more is there to do concerning circular economy. It is definitely seen as an important facilitator of actions by operators to improve circularity, but it is not seen as a driver. And the question is, should it be a driver, and can it become a driver? As you said, and also the poll showed it, the importance of the entire regulatory framework. So the issue is definitely not straightforward and does not represent the same situation across various sectors of that the IED covers. The directive is just one of many instruments linked to the way industrial installations are designed or managed concerning circular economy goals and objectives. And we are fully aware that operators already do a lot, driven by, for example, by the economic calculation, optimization of resource use, as these represent operating costs or generation of waste, also costly. We all know that this is a daily bread of the economic operators' responsibility areas. And other aspects are also compliant with the EU and national laws and rules on efficient use of resources, materials, water, energy, and generation of waste. Mm-hmm. So firstly, the IED revision seeks to identify measures that would encourage the operators to continuously improve their resource efficiency, and including the safe use of chemicals. And the elements that we are looking at is, for example, addressing the so-called narrative best available techniques, which are those BATs that are cited in a descriptive manner without any associated emission limit values. Secondly, there is also the issue of environmental performance levels cited in the BAT documents. The IED's pollution control activities originally concentrate on reduction of emissions of pollutants, in particular to air via emission limit values. However, in some member states, there are still not homogeneous approach to giving the same legal status on the narrative BATs and on BAT-related environmental performance levels. So another element is also looking at how what is now most of the time included in best available technique number 1 in BAT conclusions is the environmental management system, including chemicals management system, and how to design and how to incorporate them or give them the higher level of importance, both in the text of the new revised Industrial Emissions Directive and through the role put in the particular BREFs. So
I ask you to come to a...
Exactly, my last sentence. We are aware of the opportunities, but the opportunities may be limited, but they are definitely there. The matrix is complex, and I'm looking forward in this debate to hear all the stakeholders that are represented here. We have a mini Sevilla technical working group with representatives of member states, NGOs, and industry. So for us, it's yet another valuable source of information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. So indeed, the way the IED operates is through these BAT reference documents, or best available technology documents, which are decided with member state experts, commission, environmental NGOs, industry, through this civil process. What I take from what you've said is that a lot of the, I guess, the tools for doing more to promote circular economy are actually already there in some form in the IED. They are just not used. They're not legally binding in the same way as, for example, a limit on pollutant emissions is. It's in there. It has to be part of an operating permit, and therefore, well, you have to abide by it. Whereas when it comes to how you use resources and so forth, energy, water, materials, there's guidance, but that's not necessarily taken up in a binding way into operating permits for individual installations. Is that, so the question is, yeah, should that happen going forward? And if so, I guess for what, for what tools? Let's get some ideas then on the priorities of different stakeholders. As I said there, and as Aneta just said too, they're all experts here today. Let's go first then to an industry perspective with Nicolas Humez, you can correct me, Chairman of Hazardous Waste Europe. He's a chemist originally, has more than 25 years experience working in the hazardous waste business here in Europe, but also at the international level. What for you, Nicolas, is the priority for this revision?
Thank you very much, Sonia, and good afternoon to everybody. IED is indeed a central piece of legislation for achieving the goals for zero pollution ambition and circular economy action plan. An article from the European Environmental Agency in November 2020 pointed out that the emission from the industries decreased significantly during the past 10 years. But at the same time, there is room for improvement, as industry still contributes a lot in terms of pollution. So taking this into consideration, I will stick to the cleaner aspect of the title of this session.
One question, can you move slightly closer to the microphone? I don't know if others have this, but for me the sound is disrupted a little bit.
Yeah.
So you were saying you're going to stick to the cleaner rather than circular, more than circular.
Yeah. Is it better now?
No, it's the microphone.
Yeah, I couldn't do more than that. Sorry for that. So I will try to continue. Sorry for the bad sound. So yes, I would like to go much more on the cleaner aspect, and we can discuss the circularity aspect for the discussion later. So we have, in fact, 4 priorities for the revision of the IED, which must be addressed in terms of cleaner industrial plan. First of all, how to really assess the environmental impact of the installations. For this, I think that ranges of level of emission, in average rate, the concentration is not really the right way. We need to develop, in addition to these ranges, dedicated yearly mass flow limits with strict caps. Second, clarify the requirement regarding the indirect discharge to water in order to ensure that micropollutants and chemicals in general, which can not be treated in general in a urban wastewater treatment plant or even in a common wastewater treatment plant, are not simply and entirely released into the environment. And today there is only dilution effect in this kind of installation, and causing a real threat for the environment. We succeeded in the waste treatment BREF revision and in the waste incineration BREF revision in introducing the fact that in case of indirect discharge, the level of emission of micropollutant must be similar to the level of emission for direct discharge, but it is still too weak and it does not cover all sectors. So I think we need also modification within the IED itself in order to be more powerful. 3, address the potential inclusion of new pollutants as key environmental issues in consistency with other pieces of legislation, and specifically the Water Framework Directive on the priority substances and priority hazardous substances, the LEC Directive, the EPRTR, and for sure everything around circular economy and the questions around the use and the management of chemicals.
Sorry, I just had a message from the technician saying, please don't hold the microphone in your hand.
Okay, it's better like that, okay. So we can also take into consideration the outcome and the conclusion from the Hazardous project, which is really tackle the issue of the management of chemicals within the industry. And the last point, the fourth one, is to ensure that the revision of the BREFs must rely on the proportionality of the effort based on the rate of contribution to environmental impact of each sector, and within the sector and the different kinds of installation in order to be more efficient and cost effective. So those proposals are very ambitious, I think, and are completely aligned with the action plan towards the zero pollution ambition and circular economy. Nevertheless, the EU industry has to be protected against competing industry outside the EU, where the level of performances for the protection of the environment is lower. I think that potentially a sort of pollutant border adjustment mechanism may help. And this mechanism is even more than important, considering the emergency for reducing the emission of pollution and chemicals, which echoes the climate emergency. It is time to act for subordinating the freedom of trade to higher environmental standards on pollutant and climate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I hope most of you understood that better than I did. For me, the reception was not great, but I nonetheless got your main points. So one, that was focused mainly on making industrial plants even cleaner, with circularity then coming after that. So one was simply setting limits or looking at limiting the concentration of pollutants is insufficient. You talked, we need a mass flow approach. So we need to look at total volumes that are emitted. It's not just concentrations. And secondly, the point you ended with, potentially looking at differentiating breaths, so guidance, depending on how an individual plant performs. Then you talked about indirect discharge into water, notably, more attention to that. And finally, the interplay with other policies. So things like the Water Framework Directive, you talked about the Haz Waste project, also chemicals policy, and making sure that all of this fits together. I guess there's minimal overlap and everything is as cost effective as possible. And I think you said when it comes to circularity too, we have to remember the global competitiveness of industries. And the need for them to, well, have an interest, as Aneta already said, in using resources as efficiently as possible, and the cost effectiveness of anything they do has to always be borne in mind. We'll see if we can get your microphone better for your next intervention, but I hope, at least for me, I got your main messages, so thank you very much. Let's move then to our third panelist, Marcin Wisniewski. He's here from Poland. As I said, he's a counsellor to the Minister for Climate and Environment in Poland. And basically his job involves taking the IED and implementing it, transposing it into Polish law. So taking all of these things and actually looking at how you translate that into a national situation and how you work with industry to translate all that into actual operating permits for installations. And he's someone, I should say, who previously worked in Aneta's unit, if I'm not mistaken, at the Commission. So you have the EU perspective as well as the Polish one to inform us with today. And perhaps interesting to hear from you, since you're actually having to take this policy and do something with it. What are some of the real, I suppose, the challenges that you've come up against in trying to take this concept of circular economy and actually implement it into permits?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sonia, for this introduction. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I fully agree what Aneta said at the beginning, that IED probably is the right place to address circular economy aspects as well. But yeah, most probably also not the only one, because we will not solve all problems and issues via the IED revision. So referring to what, for example, IED evaluation report says about its efficiency to address issues like resource efficiency and circular economy, that basically IED was not the most efficient here. I would like to say that definitely the problem could be in this not binding or not directly binding character of BET APLs. Because obviously the binding requirements have a potential to make the biggest difference in terms of reduction of impacts caused by the industry. To give an example from our ways to deal with this, let's say, not binding requirements, is that in fact these APLs must be transposed into permit conditions. So in fact, there are in a permit whenever they are set up in the BET conclusions. The only difference between these APLs and IELs is that in case certain installation is not able to meet this value, it's a bit easier way to apply for higher or lower, depending what value is at stake. So this is slightly, but let's say a relevant difference. But in case we would like to think about making this performance level legally binding, so put equal mark between them and AELs, we must remember that this binding character also impose a very important need to address the quality of data and representativeness of data we are using to set these levels. And with this efficiency values like resource efficiency, energy efficiency, I think this could be more difficult than with the emission data, because simply the monitoring regime, it's totally different. Those data are very often based on some calculations, balances, etc. And there will be probably a big challenge to somehow ensure the proper quality and representativeness. So the first point from me. Second is that probably the best way to somehow promote circular economy would be to simply make a good climate for the industry to do so, because if there will be some benefits, industry will see some benefits in making their plants more circular, they definitely will do so. I think this is what they do now. And how we can promote this, maybe some idea could be to use somehow this collective knowledge of IED community and try to produce some more detailed guidance, some additional documents that will say what conditions must be met to say that given residue, given substance could be considered a byproduct, for example. The same could apply to end of waste criteria. Probably this will also create a certain legal certainty and will make all administrative procedures shorter, because both operators and competent authorities will have clear guidelines how to assess given problem, how to deal with certain substances, whether it's safe to reuse them or there must be applied some additional measures to make it environmentally, to do it in an environmentally sound manner, and to also protect the interest of the citizens. The third issue...
Come to a close quickly? Or soon?
Yeah, the innovation. I think also that the innovation will play an important role here. This notion of innovation observatory, when will probably provide some new ideas of making industry more circular, to substitute certain chemicals, etc. But this is probably subject for another panel, so I will stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I should say I've seen a number of questions indeed coming in relating to innovation. There is a second session centered on the IED tomorrow from 3:30 to 4:30, that's Brussels time, which is focused more specifically on innovation, in that case particularly for energy intensive industries, but there will be an opportunity to discuss innovation specifically. Let's move then to our final panelists. There are other questions coming in, so we will take some of those in a moment. I'd like to introduce Aliki Kriekouki, who's here, as I said, from the European Environmental Bureau, the largest network of environmental citizens organizations in Europe. She's a senior policy officer there, and she has been with their industrial production units for the past 6 years now, and therefore her remit is basically working as a stakeholder in the Seville process, developing best available technology reference documents for industrial installations, and therefore she's also focused right now on the revision of the IED. Aliki, over to you. What can or what should we be doing for it to do more on circular economy?
Thank you, Sonia. In our view, the transition to circular economy is essential, and for this purpose, for this transition, we need to use all tools available in our toolkit. So we shouldn't be considering is the IED the right tool or the more effective tool. We should rather thinking how we can actually use this tool to deliver. Since the ID, it is the main instrument we have in Europe to regulate major industrial sectors. But to get more into the specifics, so what we see, it's three main aspects that we need to consider. The first one is to introduce value chain considerations, both in the ID and the BREFs, and develop value chain BAT conclusions. And to explain a bit more, to give a bit of background. So the current scope of BAT conclusions and subsequently of permit conditions for installation is limited to the boundaries of a given installation. The thing with this is, the problem with this is that the concepts of circular economy, including energy, materials, and waste flows, do not fit well within sector boundaries. This has also been recognized in the EU Circular Economy Action Plan, so that what was written there, it's that the industry has a key role in transition to a circular economy, but this is particularly with regard to sustainable sourcing of energy and raw materials and cooperating across the value chain. So this is something that is not, let's say, the ideas in current format does not allow for such an innovative approach, one could say. So what would this mean concretely? It means that if a process uses specific raw material, then the BREF should consider the impacts of mining and obtaining this raw material, as well as opportunities to recover this material from waste and products at the end of their life cycle. So we need to determine value chain BAT. This involves collaboration with upstream and downstream partners. And we should not, when we are deriving BAT conclusions, we should not only look on techniques that aim to limit the direct impacts of an installation, but we need to think about techniques that, of course, are in the control of the operator in one way or the other, that can reduce the environmental impact of the whole value chain. There was a very interesting study on this. I would like to mention for the people that want to read more. So it was published in 2018 by VITO, the Flemish Institute for Technological Research, based in Belgium, entitled Best Available Techniques and the Value Chain Perspective, when all these concepts are elaborated further. So this is a key aspect for us, and this is why I'm also opening with this, because what we have concluded, also talking with other NGOs and few member states, is that even the most well-crafted BAT conclusions and permit conditions under the current scope and format, they're not serving the purpose. They're not going to be, let's say, promote resource efficiency and help the transition to a circular economy in the most impactful way. And there are a lot of things that we can do. I mean, we can, of course, amend the ID provisions, and we could also open the BREF review rules. This is a commission implementing decision that outlines how BREFs are being reviewed. And there are elements therein about circularity, but right now the thing is the way the Seville approach, the elaboration of the BREFs is taking place, we see clearly that the focus is on pollution abatement, and more specifically on air pollution abatement rather than circularity. We had a very interesting, cut me if I'm talking too much. I don't have a timer.
We're going to have to stop in a moment, yeah. So. Okay,
yes. So then, just to say that we had a very positive example recently in the technical working group for the BREF linked to the ceramics industry, where the technical working group decided to set up a subgroup and focus on circularity and decarbonization. So you could see that, innovation is coming in the process, and this could be a way, an approach to be adopted in other BREF technical working groups as well. And this would be something to include written in the BREF guidance. So to establish this practice, and of course also have the right people to engage in the groups. So to have people, circular economy experts, engaged in the technical working groups. I can mention the other 2 points. I will not elaborate on them because of the lack of time. So the other thing is, as Marcin said, to make the binding nature of resource efficiency BTA plus explicit the way BTLs are, because right now, I mean, they're binding, but we don't really see this in the provisions are not very clear. So we see a very diverse implementation in different member states and regions. And the third point is to promote, of course, industrial symbiosis. There we have specific barriers because there is a lack of platforms that industry can come together. Yeah, that was the third point.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the value chain, and I think you explained clearly, it's true, by nature, the circular economy usually extends beyond the boundaries of an individual installation. Industrial symbiosis, and you also talked about making these environmental performance levels more binding. I wanted to have a follow-up question to everyone. A question that came in was, should we force transition to a circular economy by the industry via enforcing new and/or stricter environmental provisions, such as stricter BATs, stricter best available technologies? And I guess this is also directly a question, should we, make these environmental performance levels binding? And if so, which ones? Does someone want to respond to that question? So should we force a transition to circular economy by industry by basically tightening up and making a lot more legally binding in the IED? Who wants to give a quick thought on that? Okay, everyone. Okay, let's try and keep our answers relatively brief, but feel free to pick up also on some of the other points made. Aneta, let's kick off with you.
Yes, taking the regulatory framework into consideration, of course, the change is the quickest made when things are made obligatory. But what is the important part of an aspect of how BREFs and BAT conclusions are being set, that this process is data-based. So they are factual, they are data-driven. And we can discuss here in the all beauty and idealistic world, what we would like to achieve. But the thing is that a lot of this information about energy efficiency, use of resources, etc., is considered as confidential business information. And this aspect we cannot forget, that businesses are not that eager on sharing on the best economic practices and where we are saving, because like we said before, this is still, those are economic operators, and for them profits and the market drivers are very important.
Is there, just because there was a question specifically about that, what if industry is not willing to share water and energy data, for example, because of confidentiality? Is there any more from, the work you've done? Is there more data that could be shared without impinging on that confidentiality?
We are working on the ways how to unlock this confidentiality and how to still share anonymously, or what is possible. So this is all in the technical working groups in Sevilla that we are constantly struggling with. But the solution is not straightforward. It's not that easy, and that can be really one of the hampering elements of why it would be very difficult to have very truthful, very factual, and very realistic data. And the other thing is, of course, the more elements we are including in the revision of the BREFs, the longer the process of revision takes, the more data to be analyzed, and then we have to also look at the balance of priorities. So when we are looking at the protection of the environment as a whole, what is the really priority and where we are getting the biggest gains from the work on the BREFs and best available techniques. I'm not saying that this is not important, but these are the important elements to always keep in mind when we are working on it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go to Marcin, and then I'll come to you, Nicolas. Marcin, you had already commented on the challenges relating to data, more in terms of something more difficult to report, or to have a clear set of values when it comes to environmental performance than it is to have a number for, or a limit for emissions. Do you think, I mean, more could be done through the idea? I mean, should it force industry in ways that it doesn't so far? What, from your perspective, could be made legally binding?
Yeah, yes. First of all, I'm not sure if forcing industries is the best formulation. I would rather prefer to say to somehow find a common understanding or promote certain actions or behaviors. But indeed, binding character meaning imposing something. Yeah, and as I already said, I see some challenges because these performance levels are usually based on certain calculations. So first of all, we need certain, for each sector, for which, or even activity, for each we decide or would decide to set legally binding performance levels, we need to also establish a clear ways how to monitor whether it's met or not in the future. Because legal character means also that member states would have to figure out what to do in situation if this parameter is exceeded. So it means some penalties, financial penalties, in some cases even a need to stop the operation. Yes, so it comes with certain consequences, and we must be aware of that. And taking all these things together comes to the conclusion that yeah, it is an option that in some cases could be considered, but we must be quite careful and make sure that we have correct and robust data to do so, as well as mechanism to be applied later on to check the compliance.
And what's maybe one example from your experience? What's one concrete change that could be made for the IED to do more to promote industrial symbiosis or more of a value chain approach? What's one change that you could envisage as useful?
Well, of course, already Aliki said a lot about that. From my perspective, as I also mentioned already, we see a big potential in promoting this general knowledge about ways to assess certain products and substances as byproducts, or how to apply end-of-waste criteria. Recently in Poland, we still have a debate regarding certain residues from wood-based panel industry, because some of the residues from the production are recirculated for the production, but some share of this is used as the fuel, for example, to provide heat to the dryers. And these residues are mainly wood, like clean wood, but some share of it is also contains some additives like resin, glues used in the production process. And this fact raised many questions whether this should be considered as waste incineration, for example. Is it the right approach? At the same time, we recognize that some plants use mainly ground wood, so like raw natural resources, and other plants also use recovered wood. And from the perspective of circular economy, of course, it's a very good idea to use recovered wood instead of logs from forest, yes? But this introduces additional uncertainty in terms of pollution that may come with this recovered wood. So here we try to figure out what should be the right criteria to promote circular economy, and at the same time somehow secure the interest of the citizens, of the local public. And in similar cases, this could be very helpful to promote this idea of recirculating certain residues in case we would have some EU-wide guidance. Yeah. Exactly.
And just to wrap that up, as Nicolas said, I mean, the point about overlap and having other policies, we have the Waste Framework Directive. I mean, we have discussions over end-of-waste criteria. From your perspective, those are not, I mean, you would still like to see something addressing byproducts, when you can use them, when not in the IED. That's what you're saying.
Something more specific for specific activities, specific installations, and specific residues.
Yeah. Okay. Nicolas, let's go to you. And the technician said to me, maybe turn down the volume on your microphone.
Yeah, is it better?
Yeah, that's much better. Great.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully. First of all, I would like that I completely support what Marcin said about the levels of performance and how to handle it from an industrial perspective and also an industrial point of view. I think that if we go further or deeper in getting more information and having more pressure on level of performances on resources and energy, the key point in the revision of the BREFs is the data collection. It's really the key point, and I think we should change a little bit the model or the methodology that has been used from the past on that. And we propose also as Hazardous Waste Europe to have a sort of two-tiered approach for the data collection in order to ensure at the end to have more accurate information, more and ensure that we take the right contextual information around a data or a measurement. As Marcin said, most of the time when we look at performances, we calculate something. And in each member state or even in each plant, we calculate in a different way. So we really have to ensure through the data collection that we get in all the questionnaires answered the same information, which is not easy, I would say. So this is a key point. Regarding the symbiosis, it's really something important, and what Aliki said about the value chain. I would like then to highlight one point which is very important. The BREFs are vertical, sector by sector, and we don't have the same level of ambitions depending on the sectors. So if we have this kind of symbiosis between different kind of industries, depending from different BREFs, we also need to ensure a sort of level playing field between the different sectors. If I just take the example of waste, a waste from an industry can be a resource for another. We have to ensure that, for example, there is no competition or unfair competition between installations that are dedicated to the treatment of waste or even the recycling of waste, and other installations that are not dedicated but can take waste as a resource without the same level. So if we go that way, okay, but then I think that we need to have a sort of streamlining and perhaps a sort of end-of-pipe technique breath with the same VATALs in order to ensure this level playing field. Otherwise, we will have unfair competition. And regarding...
If we come to a close? Or
yeah, okay, I stop here. So.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Aliki, and I wanted to include one specific question that came into you, which is, can or will the IED contribute to better communication and information on substances and materials in the value chain to ensure safe use in following life cycles? Maybe you could address that briefly. I'm conscious we're running out of time, so if you can be brief, then we'll see if we can get a little more input from the audience and then give you each a chance for some final words before we wrap up. Yeah, go ahead.
Before this, I would like to pick up on what Aneta said before about the challenges that setting VTAPs are faced during the Sevilla process, about the fact that these data are confidential. So I would like to mention there has been considerable progress through the years by the IPPCB, the commission board that coordinates the exchange of the BREFs. So we see in the latest reviews that we have some closed sessions where experts, limited number of experts that are not competitors of the industry, can actually take place and sign a confidentiality agreement, and then be able to see the data and debate. I mean, it's not a perfect system so far, but there is progress, and it is something that we can, again, through the BREF reviews, address, because the issue of confidentiality is being already mentioned in the brief review rules, but we do not have a specific, let's say, procedure laid down. So this would be a way to move forward when it comes to confidentiality, and to also discuss with industry and to make sure that all stakeholders are at ease when laid down a specific approach that then could be adopted in all the different brief reviews and technical working groups. And another point is the lack of data, and when we are developing and deriving the BAT apples. And there, from our point of view, to impose monitoring requirements during a brief revision would be the solution, because at the end of the day, we need specific data to be able to monitor circularity, to monitor progress, and of course to set sound BAT apples. Because if their binding nature is going to be more explicit in the future, and then the operators have to comply with specific performance levels, this has, of course, to be sound and accurate. And so lack of data, add some monitoring requirements linked to circularity, and find a concrete way to address the CBI issue.
Okay. Thank you for that. We had two more questions, polling questions that we had prepared. I propose that we still take them in these last 10 minutes back to back. And they basically, if we get the first one up now, it's basically, so the first one is, in total, 40 million tons of ferrous slag was used in 2016 in the EU. What percentage was sent to landfill? And this is to see how much you know about circularity, of course. And just to, I suppose, to give you an idea of how great the circular challenge is, and that it's, well, to make the point that it's also different for different sectors. Some sectors at the moment, some sectors are more circular than others. So let's give you a second to vote, and we'll see the responses coming in. We'll give it just another second or two. And what I propose is we'll take the second polling question straight after this one in a moment, and then I'll give each of our panelists, you should have about a minute or so, or a minute and a half to wrap up. I'll try and put another one or two questions to you from the floor perhaps, but you can use that final minute or so, obviously, to leave us with any points that you want to pick up on. What percentage was sent to landfill? Well, we have a fairly pessimistic group watching us today. Almost half of you think it was 46%. If I'm not mistaken, the correct answer is actually 5%. So the situation is not quite as bad as many of you think. It's actually 5%, not 46%, the percentage sent to landfill. Okay, let's move then to our final polling question. Obviously, we've just muddied the waters by suggesting some sectors are actually not doing that badly. Nonetheless, that's unfortunately not true for everyone. There is still plenty of potential to improve circularity. So the question here is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate the potential IED operators have to make further contributions to resource and energy efficiency via the IED? Let's say 1 is very little contribution, and 5 means you think there is great potential for further contribution, via the IED. So this is to gauge a little bit what potential you see, I think, not just for more circularity in general, but specifically via the policy instrument that we're talking about today, which is the Industrial Emissions Directive. There are obviously other tools out there, but this discussion is really focused on that. Let's leave it a second. And so, well, the results, a third of you are saying 4, so that means quite a lot of potential still, untapped potential, followed by 3. So, so more than half of you see at least decent, if not good potential. Well, if I see number 5 is down there as well. So there is a lot of scope, it would seem, or at least the people watching today believe there is a lot more that could be done through the IED. let's go then to a final round. We've got 6 minutes left, so that's a minute or a little bit more for each of you. I'll tell you just one or two of the other questions that came in. There was one: will the environmental management system play a major role to define the major or existing environmental impacts? Is there anyone that would like to pick up on that in their final word? Aneta, go ahead. And maybe a second question for you then, since I've got you, which is, have you considered whether the IED should become more harmonized at EU level? Maybe you can just give a sentence on that as well. Go ahead.
So on harmonization, as this is in the better regulation, this is one of the requirements. So having the European law that we are developing that is coherent with other laws and harmonized with the requirements, this is something that will be also assessed in the process through the regulatory scrutiny board, through consultations, etc. So we are also working in this very consultative way in order to have everybody on board, all DGs that have the legislation related to the IED, and all the environment DG units that have this legislation that is impacted, like for example urban wastewater treatment plants. So this is a definitely yes. The other thing, to summarize, so all points taken, all the need on the guidance, on better regulation, on end of waste criteria of what is the byproduct, etc. Those are the very important elements feeding into the better utilization of, for example, of what is waste or what is generated as end product. Also, when we are looking at the whole value chain, upwards and downwards, the safety of what we are getting in, the cleaner materials we are getting in, the cleaner waste we are generating, and the less environmental problems we have. So this is yet another important issue. What we are looking at is, indeed, coming to your question about the environmental management system, is how we can use it in order to empower the operators to make this extra mile in order to tap on the potential of the circularity, circular economy. But we are looking, and should we be really saying you shall do this, you shall not do that? Or should we just design a process that leads to a better communication and better dialogue between the operators and the competent authorities, in order to really recognizing what are the specificities of the given installation and of the geography where they operate, in order to set such requirements in the permits that are just requirements embedded maybe in the environmental management system, and guidance given through the BET conclusions that then can be useful in order to set those requirements in the permits. So something that it will be flexible, but also giving the push to make this extra step. And this is the challenge, how to then design it and how to then translate it into the legal language. But this is something why we are there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Aneta, and also for wrapping up the discussion. So in effect, the question you're grappling with is how directive should the directive be, and how much should it facilitate and promote dialogue, which then in turn delivers ultimately a positive result for circular economy. In the meantime, we've got 2 minutes left, so that's 30 seconds for everyone else. Perhaps useful to hear your final thought on what Aneta just proposed, this question of how much should be directly imposed by the IED, or leave us with one thought. Nicolas, let's go to you first.
Yes, thank you very much. One thought about that is, I think that we can, as Aneta said, we can try to have probably tougher BATs on certain methodologies. I think something about separation of different streams, whatever we talk about, material, water, different kind of waters, waste. So be tougher on this obligation of separation in order to avoid, all those mixing material that are a bit contaminated and don't reach the right quality. So I think this is really something we should look at in the BATs.
Okay, thank you. Marcin, and then Aliki. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. promotion of dialogue is certainly a good idea, and probably these environmental management schemes, as already described in all BAT conclusions, are the good starting point. However, my personal observation is that from the other side, we should not exceed with various plans or schemes that we put into the BAT conclusions, because planning itself not necessarily may guarantee a success. You can simply do the plan because your permits told you so. So we need to be focused on the main objective and what we want to achieve, but definitely the idea to promote dialogue, it's the right one.
Thank you. And Aliki?
I agree with the point made by Marcin. What we've seen is that we already have these elements in the idea already now. There is flexibility and there is the EMS. It's not an explicit requirement to have a circular economy plan in the EMS, but in any case, in our view, we think that we need to go for more strict, concrete requirements if we really want to see the idea delivered on the circular economy. Because right now, we do have the elements, there is enough flexibility, it's not really working to the extent that it should be working. That's why we need to see more concrete requirements, also for the purpose of harmonization across the industry and member states. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, a big virtual round of applause to our panel, our four speakers, and a big thank you to everyone who has stayed with us this past hour. There were lots of questions coming in. I'm sorry we haven't been able to take all of them. Do approach our speakers individually afterwards if you want to follow up. And a reminder that tomorrow at 3:30, there will be a second session focused on the IED, focused more on innovation, energy intensives. And that session will also address some of the questions that came in, which was about, will the IED address greenhouse gas emissions and or other pollutants going forward? Because there we will specifically look at possible synergies between addressing air pollutants and CO2. So tune in for that if you want answers there. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon, and enjoy the rest of GreenWeek.
Thank you.